It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance. My name is Brian Wilson, and as always, my co-host, Andy Grabner. Hey, Andy.
Hey. I guess what?
I would say it's funny getting to be able to see you while we do this and have you see what you make fun of me. Probably you do all the time, and now I'm finally getting to see it for the first time.
Brian, I would never make fun of you. It was really the first time when I tried to make some facial expressions, seeing if I can get you out of your talking flow. But I guess, no, it was really the first time.
You did that. You see, if you go back and listen, you'll notice I made a couple of mistakes, especially coming out of it. I'm also a little flustered today, Andy. It's, performance, everybody always thinks about work as like, sometimes I like work, sometimes I don't. It's a challenge and all this. But sometimes I got to tell you, when you have kids, work is an oasis. This morning I was just having, to deal with not computer problems, not deployment problems, but arguing with my 11-year-old on why she needs to brush her teeth in the morning before going to school. And her fighting back with me because kids just want to fight back over the dumbest crap they can and trying to hold it together and not just like throw her through the window, and you're just like, just brush your teeth. I could have got into the argument that, it's the conspiracy of fluoride to take, but I didn't want to anyway. Anyhow, I'm glad to be here because this is an oasis, as I was saying, and it's always a great time. And I hope our listeners feel that way. And most importantly, Andy, I'm glad to be here with you because your smile always brings a smile to my face.
I'm happy so. Hey, Brian, before going on to our guest, I also have to say thank you to somebody else that is not on the show today, but I wanted to say thank you to the guys at Neotis and especially Henry Grexit, who has been today, as time of the recording, 24th of March, he did a 24-hour performance marathon with, I think, 20 different presenters around the globe. He's got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and he did it 24/7, 24 hours. So it was really great to have all these folks. And he allowed me to talk about Captain and very glad he keeps doing. I had to bring it in. But now to something different.
Yes.
Our guest. I'm very happy it took about a year from the first, I think, tweet that I sent to Jaana about, hey, I read this blog post and it was called Things I Wish Developers Would Know About Databases. And she was going on about database performance and things like that. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. Because Brian and I constantly talk about application performance problems and we always blame it on the database. But we always try to bring up the points that if you are writing good code that is making efficient usage of the database, then the problems might not be in the database. But anyway, I reached out to Jaana. A year later, Jaana, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi. Yeah, sorry for making you wait. But, to be honest, I also table flipped and left databases, since we had our, initial conversation. So I'm kind of coming back to performance observability to that field. So I'm great. As far as I can understand from this conversation, I'm super happy not to have kids. Yeah. Not yet, not before this pandemic ends. So yeah, I'm happy. So thanks a lot for for the wait, and I'm a bit ashamed.
The way I look at it is, it's like, do you ever hear the Muppet Show, Kermit the Frog, and all that, right? When that show was on, so I was a youngin' when that show initially aired, and their first season they were having trouble getting guests, and then once people started seeing how good it was, that's when everyone was like, "Oh yeah, I'll be on the show." And I think you were just looking to wait to see, is this show any good? Do they have good people on? You're just being judicious and smart about.
I had no questions about that. I had no questions about it. It was just really the matter of me, being a bit busy last year because of the pandemic and everything, and then I switched jobs, and onboarding at a large company takes a long time. So sorry for that.
Oh no, I was trying to give you an excuse, but.
But Jaana, you bring up a good point. Can you remind folks your background, because you said databases was just a little intermezzo that you had, and you actually did observability performance before, and now you're back to observability?
Yeah. I can give a bit background. Yeah. So, I'm working at AWS right now. I'm a principal engineer working on like mainly observability and our overall like instrumentation stack and like, roadmap and so on. But before this, I was at Google for a long time. My last, endeavor at Google was databases, and that's how we kind of like, initiated like our initial conversations. But before databases, I was working on the instrumentation team. Maybe some of you have known about this project called Opencensus, which was kind of like, inspired from the instrumentation library Google uses that's linked to every like production binary called Census. So we decided to, just kind of build some vendor agnostic instrumentation library that might work for like, multiple backends. Some of the concepts were inspired from Census, but it was really like a project from scratch. That project became, OpenTelemetry after it's merged with Open Tracing. And before, all of that, I actually ended up coming back to this field after many years because I was working on the Go programming language. And the last 2 years I was on the team, I was mainly focused on like performance, diagnostic tools. There's a bunch of different things in Go. And the community is very, very, I think, motivated to, use these tools, understand like there's I think a good culture in the the language community. So that was my kind of like I realized that at some point, some of the areas that I want to work on, like for example distributed tracing, it's just not you cannot scope it to a programming language. It's just like a larger effort, and you have to have like consensus from all the parties in order to make anything. That's how I kind of like pivoted myself more into this field. But yeah, I had like going backwards, I just kind of like pivoted back and forth, I think, into observability and kind of ended up being here. So it's interesting.
Great. I mean, talking about Go, I just spent 4 hours today trying to, let's say that I have a love-hate relationship with Go. In the end, love always prevails. And so actually, literally 5 minutes before we started the recording, I finally got my code to work and I just deployed it on my cluster. It's a little Go service, but it is like, hilarious.
I feel like that love and hate, right? Like I always compare it to, any other, especially I think in the beginning of my, like, when I became a user, like in the earlier days, it was much, much difficult because I was always comparing it to my experience with other languages. I came from a JVM background. So like in terms of diagnostic tools over there, was not in a good shape, right? Like, and still not in a good shape. There's a lot of work going on, but I kind of like, stayed for the simplicity of the language and, I just can't get things done with it. So that kind of works for me. But, I'm trying to not to be religious. I think I'm too biased because, I've been very involved in Go, but I took a break. I think 4 years. It's been 4 years I haven't been working on Go as a full-time thing, so it's been very healthy.
Hey, now to your current role. So you said you switched from Google to AWS, and they are responsible for observability, OpenTelemetry. I would like to get maybe an overview, like what's the current state of OpenTelemetry at AWS?
Yeah, so actually, like, said, like, I generally work on instrumentation. OpenTelemetry is a piece of it, a big piece of it, actually. But there's a lot more going on. And I can give you kind of like a, brief maybe summary of what we're trying to do with OpenTelemetry. So, in the last 5 to 10 years, we have all these different vendors building their different, like, solutions. And they all had like different instrumentation, telemetry generation, client libraries. One of the difficulty was you go to a customer who doesn't want to know too much about instrumentation or don't want to understand like, the telemetry points. And they don't want to re-instrument everything. So this was an initial problem. And then there's all these open source projects that want to put some, out of the box instrumentation, but there's not a vendor agnostic way of doing this. So they end up doing nothing or inventing their proprietary, formats. This was a huge, big issue because most of the time people just want to get things out of the box. So that's what, how OpenTelemetry came around. And AWS is, I think, like, given the scale and the diversity of our customers, like, there's so much, right? Like, in terms of our customers usually want to use like 3 to 4 or like sometimes 4 to 5 different solutions. They want to see their data on multiple products, and not just on AWS products, also like other products, right? Like and us being able to collect, produce, maybe analyze, and also stream the telemetry data in a vendor agnostic format is very important for us, and important for like all the other partners and companies that we're working with in the APM and observability space. So AWS has been, I think, very sort of like smart in terms of saying that, hey, maybe we should try to like align with what OpenTelemetry is doing, because that's going to be the format we can speak, everybody can understand, right? So the goal right now is trying to make OpenTelemetry collection much easier on all our compute platforms, EC, EC2, EKS, ECS, Lambda. If you want to do like if you want to have like your own instrumentation, which you should be able to export it to a sink, like a collector available in the platform, so you don't have to deal with like running the collector yourself. So that's one of the goals that we're trying to achieve. The next thing is we also have like a lot of managed services that produce those telemetry data. Historically, this type of data has been very vendor specific. We would use CloudWatch for metrics, X-ray for traces. Now we're like looking at cases where can we produce this as a vendor agnostic thing, so we can push that data as well to everyone else, or to whatever tool the customer is wants to use. So OpenTelemetry may end up being this like common telemetry format for us. And I think like I came to a realization a couple of years ago that being a cloud provider is really like being a telemetry provider in some sense. So if we're a telemetry provider, this is the format we want to use when we want to communicate, not just internally to ourselves, but externally as well. There's also I can give a bit more of what else is going on. So I think OpenTelemetry is very limited right now to metrics, traces, and logs is coming up maybe next year. It's in the early stages. But we care about other things like database performance, for example, is one of them. Hey, can we propagate OpenTelemetry labels all the way to the databases, because they can do accounting based on labels, and so users can go and break down. There's a lot of like effort going on for eBPF. Like, how are we going to be enabling eBPF? Can we generate aggregated data and like output it to OpenTelemetry? So that's the other piece of thing that I'm working on. So there's a lot going on, to be honest.
Yeah, I got a couple of questions here. So it feels for me, at least, I assume the first kind of focus of all of this is to enable your users that deploy their applications or services on the AWS infrastructure to make it very easy for them to expose their own telemetry data, or maybe get some telemetry data off the runtimes already run on. So, and actually that's a question now for me. So if I would, let's say, use a Lambda function, and I want my telemetry, you make it easy for me so that my code, my Lambda function, will expose telemetry data. Make it easy to figure out if something is wrong in my code. Now, are you also planning on exposing your own telemetry data to the end user within your own runtime code and within your service code? Because eventually, maybe it's not my code, but because I use your services wrong, or maybe there's a problem with your services. Is this also something that you are thinking of exposing to the end user, or is this just something you would use internally?
Yes, I briefly mentioned that we have 2 main managed services and we want to expose telemetry data, but I didn't go into detail. So thanks for asking. So, most of the time, actually, like most of the customers, they can do their own instrumentation, but what is valuable to them is like being able to see all these black boxes, right? Like Lambda runtime, for example. It does a lot of interesting things, and that's not visible. Or a user cannot do anything by just instrumenting their Lambda function, because there's a lot, else is going on outside of that, function block. By using OpenTelemetry, we want to do we want to be able to, produce our telemetry data in the same format as well. So there's been already some work going on. Like for example, some of the databases, some of the other managed services, like S3 is trying to do some more trying to expose more internal traces and stuff. But it's been in our proprietary formats. So you have to still go and find that data in X-ray. We're kind of thinking about what would happen if we can produce all that data in one format and give you as a streaming service, for example. So you can take everything, see everything end to end, and you don't have to necessarily start with instrumenting yourself, right? Like you should be able to see the big picture, maybe end to end by traces coming from us automatically. And then, if you want to participate into that, you might be able to, use in either OpenTelemetry or something compatible with that propagation and the data format. But that's sort of the goal. We actually don't want people to, start themselves. We just want them to be relying on the data coming from us. Also, some of them may be framework integrations and other stuff that we can still provide. So Lambda is an interesting example because the Lambda runtime framework is also us, right? We can automatically create you a trace span, for example, for every Lambda function. And if you still want to participate into that, you are free to, bring your instrumentation library or OpenTelemetry or, OpenTelemetry compatible library and add your custom things. But I think the overall vision is we should provide you out of the box as much as possible. And if you want to do something on top of that, you should be, free to do it.
And this brings another question, because you said, right, one of the things that I wanted to ask you today is how can we get developers to actually, really leverage OpenTelemetry? And I was wondering, are we moving towards a world where we ask developers to manually put in their traces, their spans? Like, do they have to think about where do I call the OpenTelemetry library, or is it more the other way, which I think it is? And I just watched your video on AWS Distro. It's a 7-minute intro video on how to get started instrumenting a Java app that is running in a container on EC2, where I think the video at least shows auto instrumentation. So my question really is the idea that, let's say, you as AWS or as the OpenTelemetry Foundation is providing not only the common protocol, but also automated instrumentation for hopefully a large number of runtimes, so that we make that easier, right? And then you can just, on top of that auto instrumentation, you can still add 2 or 3 additional metric points that you may need.
Yeah, auto instrumentation has always been the goal, since the Opencensus days. That's why we came up with this vendor agnostic thing. So, we can make sure, everybody was tired of, providing this auto instrumentation integration. So we thought that, hey, if there's a vendor agnostic thing, we can actually have everyone, doing the integrations, auto, out of the box, instrumentation for common frameworks. For example, one example, I can give concrete examples. I think it's much easier. gRPC can provide, traces automatically without you doing anything, if they use OpenTelemetry today to instrument, right? The framework. But they've never been able to do it because there hasn't been an industry standard where, you would use it and there's a way to get data out of it in a well-known format. So they've never been able to do it. The idea was OpenTelemetry, when it becomes successful, we're first going to start with providing some of these integrations ourselves, but eventually all these projects will take OpenTelemetry, import it, and provide instrumentation in the framework without us doing any work. And the same thing applies to maybe this is easier for libraries, but the bigger problem was the binaries, for example, databases. How are they going to be utilizing some of these concepts? Similarly, we have this very well understood now expose data format. So they can again import the OpenTelemetry libraries, produce that data, and then write it to either OpenTelemetry collector or somewhere, and then the entire community can the user can understand and push it to whatever backend. The idea was always we should provide out of the box automatic instrumentation as much as possible. Nobody wants to do any instrumentation work.
Yeah. And I think this will also make life easier from vendors like us, right? At Dynatrace, we've been building instrumentation agents for the last 15 years. And the challenge is always, I think we've become good with it, but still there's so many new technologies, new versions, new frameworks, and you always have to adapt your instrumentation. And if we can all agree on a standard, then obviously the value of such an agent that a commercial vendor like we provide goes down, because eventually over the next couple of years they're kind of obsolete, because hopefully OpenTelemetry takes over. But it makes life for the end users much easier, because you don't have to think about, hey, I don't get the right telemetry data or traces, but now you do, because you hopefully can be sure that this library, this software that you're using has been properly already instrumented, either by the vendor itself or because these open source agents have become so good in auto instrumentation, you really get exactly what you need in order to do some troubleshooting, some performance profiling, and so on.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was just going to say, Andy, that brings a smile on my face in a way, kind of a snarky smile, because I just think of, the idea of auto instrumentation. I think that's a wonderful goal. But what you all have to then deal with is what we have to deal with on a regular basis is new versions, users using the frameworks or the code in ways that you hadn't planned for, these things breaking and then turning into supports. And it's, the auto instrumentation side of it is where it gets really sticky. And it's the smile, I'd say it's a little bit more of an evil smile, because it's kind of like, great, now now other people will see what goes into the auto instrumentation side. Because manual instrumenting would be a real pain. So it'd be awesome if you all can take care of that. And it's just always that staying on top of it and find, the funny thing that you always see is that you have a framework, you have best practices, and then you put it in the hands of developers and everything goes out the window. And you start looking at what they're doing. You're like, what are you doing? Well, I can do that. And I want it. You're like, okay. But so it gets fun. It gets fun when you get on that side of it.
Yeah, I'm very pessimistic actually as well. I'm trying to be more optimistic because there's also a lot of legacy. We have this super nice vision. Maybe eventually we'll have this stable data format that everybody may be speaking, but the data format itself is complex. There's already 25 different data formats. The instrumentation libraries and their stability is the other thing. There's a lot of complexities there. Yeah. I gave an example, hey, why gRPC is not importing OpenTelemetry, but it's difficult to rely on a dependency like that and make sure that your versions are compatible with the upcoming versions of OpenTelemetry and so on. So all these problems are very hard problems in the end of the day. I've seen though, couple of projects became very successful. One example is pprof. And I think I was very opinionated about we should have a very stable export data format, regardless of what the instrumentation libraries will be like. As soon as we document, we have a good spec, and people know what type of data they should be exposing in OpenTelemetry protocol, this project can succeed. Because of what I learned from pprof. Pprof, the profiling project from Google, it actually is a data format and a couple of tools, and everybody is going and writing the instrumentation piece themselves pretty much. For example, Go Runtime exposes pprof. It does all of its doing and then produces the pprof export format. Pprof is everywhere. It's not a maybe very, very globally accepted profiling one true format or anything, but it's a widely adopted thing and used very close to even language runtimes, because it has this very stable data format, and they don't necessarily care which instrumentation library you use. You're free to do whatever as long as you produce that. The other, I think, example is Prometheus. Prometheus export format is just everywhere right now. The entire world relies on that. Even though there's this new upcoming thing, OpenMetrics, but they've been able to achieve it by having the exposition format and keeping it very stable and making no compromises about the stability.
Yeah, and I think you're right. We have to keep optimistic about this, right? Because if we do take that pessimistic approach, we'll never get started. So it's got to start somewhere, and it's got to get built out. And I think the cloud vendors.
It's good to be, I think, skeptic about this because there's also a lot of projects that fail.
Oh yeah, right. But if you go too skeptical, it'll never take off, right? If you got to start building it somewhere. And I think the cloud vendors taking some of this approach have a little bit of an advantage because it's a lot easier for the cloud vendor to say, let's say if you're going to use Lambda, for example, if you're going to use Lambda, here's how you use Lambda. Here's how you'll get the metrics from it if you use it this way. If you don't use it this way, you're not going to get it. Whereas when people come to vendors like us, they're expecting they're going to pay for us to get this data from whatever they have because we're a vendor doing it as opposed to being that cloud provider which says this is the scope in which it works. We're expected to work within any scope. So you have a little bit of an advantage in that case because you can more easily set the guardrails of the conditions for leveraging it. So you definitely have an advantage there.
Yeah. One of the, I think, interesting aspects of OpenTelemetry is it's a forum between also vendors like you and cloud providers at this point. So I just felt like it was very difficult to kind of have some of these like conversations because I think as a cloud provider, I was always having these conversations one by one, but there hasn't been a single place where people would come and agree and sort of like hey, like you are a vendor, what do you expect from like Lambda? Like there was not an open forum for that. I think it's just kind of like maybe working against if the vendor wants to, do differentiator products. But at the same time, it kind of helps in terms of at least, having some consensus. So at least we know what basically we should cover. And OpenTelemetry is providing that forum, which is, I think, unique in the space at least.
Now, Jaana, collecting data is one thing, or exposing traces. The question is, where do we send the data to? And then also what happens with the data there? We have been, and other vendors in our space as well, we've been not only talking about auto instrumentation, but then automatically detecting problems, automatically detecting anomalies. And it goes beyond what you typically see and again, I'm referring back to the video that you showed, which is great that you have on the distro page, which is great, but it shows I'm a single user and I'm a developer. I'm clicking on a link and then I want to see that trace. And then I turn the database off and then I see the database has a problem. But obviously in large, if you want to use this for production use cases, then collecting data is one thing, but then where do I send it to and the analysis on top? Now, here's my question to you. Is this something that AWS is also moving towards? Are you also moving towards the data backend and also the data analytics on top of it?
Yeah, so we have a bunch of different initiatives in this area. None of them are like very, as far as I can understand, not everybody quite understands, but I can try to give a brief, maybe summary. So, the distributed tracing, maybe if we can talk about distributed tracing. Mm-hmm. The metrics, we have similar initiatives for metrics as well, though. But in distributed tracing, our backend has been X-ray. And X-ray has been just a tool to kind of like, you can query, visualize, and all that. On top of that, there's a lot of like different initiatives around like anomaly detection at AWS. This is a hard topic, so it's just not like there's an easy solution, but there are a lot of like teams trying to figure out like seasonal differences or like if there's like a night. One of the difficulties I specifically want to talk about distributed tracing because distributed traces are usual downsample, so you don't always have this full data, right? Like you may try to have, but like there's a performance cost for that, and we realized that our customers most of the time end up like collecting like 90% of the time, collecting very boring traces, but missing out all these like edge cases like 99 percentile and 95 percentile and above. So one thing that we want to do is like also making collection a bit more smarter. Like let's try to like collect as much as data and analyze it in the cluster before it's been exported to any backend. If it's an interesting case, if it's an 95th percentile and above type of case. So this is one of the initiatives we're trying to do. The other one is like the anomaly detection that I described about. The other, like there's like some other like initiatives such as simultaneously want to be able to take a look at like multiple signals, like not just traces, but to metrics. And this is one of the other reasons that we are interested in OpenTelemetry, because we want to be able to correlate things. So we want to have like more consistent labeling all across the telemetry data we collect. And if there are any like interesting cases that we capture in metrics, for example, we want to be able to enable maybe more like tracing collection or tweak our sampling strategy and stuff like that. These are all like initiatives in flight. So but as you mentioned, that the difficulty is actually making any sense of this data. It's so much data. Most of the time it's not very useful because it's just a repetitive. You're collecting similar data again and again. So what's valuable is being able to kind of give people these are the interesting cases, and I have like 5 categories of interesting things for this particular critical path maybe. So that you can allow them to see what else is going on in their critical path. And if you can alert on them like by anomaly detection, that would be the next step. But anomaly detection in my experience has been very, very difficult problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that gives me hope, Brian, that what we are doing at Dynatrace still has a long way to go, because we
have a long way to go too. It's like I'm just making it sound like we actually have been. I mean, this is a hard topic for the entire industry. So
yeah, Andy, I was going to say. Sorry, go on, Jaana.
You go ahead. I can.
I was just going to say this. You said it gives you hope, Andy. It gives me fear that once we have the big arm of the cloud vendors going beyond collecting the traces and processing them, what'll become of vendors like us?
But the reason why I said I have hope is because we have been focusing on this for a long, long time. And yes, obviously, cloud vendors and others will catch up or will provide services. But I think in the end, it's collaborative what we're doing here.
I feel like, cloud vendors doesn't necessarily want to, do all the like work that you want to do, because it's such a, there's so many things that we can do, but in the end of the day, we care about our core platform, right? That maybe that's why we're more focused on collecting at this point, because we want to be able to collect and provide that data and enable like other companies to do the work with the data.
Exactly. I see it the same way, right? I mean, you can focus on what you're strong in and why people come to you, and people may not come to you because you have the best end user monitoring and anomaly detection, but you can give the data, but essentially you help your customers to run the services and platforms reliably on your platform. And then you also have the data that they can then use with other tools.
That's why I think like we are super focused on like core reliability. We want to have like, the core metrics, traces, being able to alert on those things. These are very fundamental for us because, you as a customer should be able to come to our platform, be able to do things reliably at a minimal base. But if you're looking for very advanced cases, and you might be also in the charge of also analyzing your data. That's the other case that we never discussed. One of the interesting things about I think we want to speak OpenTelemetry is, hey, maybe we will be also able to export the S3s, and you will be able to read your telemetry data in raw format and do whatever you want to do with that, right? So that's sort of like the other goal.
Hey, I brought up the term AWS Distro a couple of times. Can you quickly maybe give an overview of what that is all about? Because I think I never mentioned what it really is.
Yeah, a lot of people have been asking me questions about what is the AWS Distro. So I mentioned a couple of times that we are thinking about deploying the collector to our platforms. The AWS distro is came as a necessity because of that. There are a couple of reasons that the distro came around, and distro is an open source project. But I think I've seen other providers doing similar things, but in a closed source fashion. So let me briefly explain. I think some of the technical challenges first, and then I can also explain why we are doing the distro. So first of all, the collector in OpenTelemetry is written in Go. And there's collector supports already a bunch of the proper upstream collector repo has open source projects represented. You have Jaeger support, you have Zipkin, Prometheus support there. But everything that is related to vendors are living in a different contrib repo. And in Go, in order to, you have to build a static binary. So you can't really say hey, I just want this to be dynamically linked. Like I just want this particular vendor's, component to be dynamically linked. So it became a necessity for us to actually have a binary in like a main, Go function. So we can pull in all the, the important bits that we care about and we want to support. And that's how the distro was born. And then, there was a couple of other things. So AWS really cares about reliability, performance regressions, especially if we're going to deploy the collector on behalf of the user, and also the security reviews. So everything that we do in the distro is actually it goes through this release process. So we take the upstream, we put everything in the upstream. Like when we write, contribute code, we put it in the upstream. And then once a while, when we were making a distro, everything goes through this reviews, performance regressions, security reviews, reliability issues, if there's anything backwards compatible or not. And then, we cut the release based on that. We're trying to follow the upstream very closely. It's just really our cadence is very similar to what upstream is doing. But just because there's that process, there's the distro. The other thing is, this enables us to also link the partners, exporters or other components into the distro. So, you don't have to go and rely on this contrib repo, which is not always well tested or not going through the same process, right? So it kind of helps the customers to be able to at least rely on the collector. They know that it's gonna work. That's where the distro came from. It came from this technical challenges, and I'm glad that it's an open source project. I mean, it doesn't do much. It's just upstream distributed, in a different way. But it's just basically coming from the fact that it's difficult to vet all these components, because this is a very huge project. And the other thing is, I think people at least know that we provide support. People at least know that if there's an issue with any of the components there, we will be able to, go and fix the upstream if it's necessary. We can make this promise for the entire project. It's huge, and there are hundreds of different components contributed by, tens of companies. So that's how the distro came around. It's trying to be just OpenTelemetry, but, distributed by going through some of the reviews that I mentioned.
Good. If I would be, if I'm a developer and I want to get started today with writing my app, deploying it on AWS, let's pick a combination of Lambda, Fargate, and maybe some database service in the back. Can all of this be handled today with OpenTelemetry? Do I get my end-to-end traces and my metrics from Lambda making calls to my microservices in Fargate and then the database?
So no, it's not, because we're still working on the end-to-end use cases. If you want to just do your user traces at this point, everything works. If you want to make calls to AWS services, you have to use still the AWS's trace context, which we provide also OpenTelemetry support. So in OpenTelemetry we provide propagators. If you do that connection, you will be able to see end-to-end traces on X-Ray. But some of the there are still things that we want to improve in terms of providing more detailed traces from databases. So you may if anyone is using want to give feedback to us, we're at the stage of prioritizing what else we want to expose from the managed services. And the next thing that we want to do is right now, we only understand our own context propagation header, but we want to switch to W3C trace. So you don't have to do anything in terms of caring about the propagation like headers or anything. Just give us whatever OpenTelemetry produces, and at some point we will be able to understand that. And that's a very complicated project, and I'm working on it this year and probably next year, and maybe it may take more longer than you think.
Yeah. So I would assume the API gateway is a perfect service, right? It's
going to be parsed. It's going to be the starting point. We in the ingestion, at the entry boundaries, we're thinking about being able to accept trace context and convert it into the internal format in the moment, because all these teams, it requires them very long time to switch to different trace context headers. So maybe initially we will be able to at the API gateway or in any other entry point, we will be able to translate it to our internal when it's internal. And if we are exposing it to the user, we want to translate it back to trace context header. So that's sort of the goal initially, but eventually we want to use it internally everywhere as well. So there's no, it's not visible to the user, but it's a technical detail for us that we also want to be aligning with the trace context.
Hey, is there anything else we have missed in this conversation? Remember, if we have people that are new to OpenTelemetry, if people that they want to know the status of where it is, where it's going, any other things we should mention, or maybe some links where people can get started, maybe even contributing, seeing the status? What's a good way?
Yeah, maybe we can talk a bit about also the status of the stability of the project, for example. That comes up as a question as well. So OpenTelemetry, given the number of companies involved, it's been trying to establish stability for a while, and it's now coming in phases. The trace, for example, has been the spec, it's been stabilized. The instrumentation libraries will be stabilized. The next thing is the metric spec. The metric spec is soon to be stabilized, and we're trying to make at least collector stabilized at the end of May. So starting with May, traces and metrics will be stable in terms of spec, collector, and instrumentation libraries. Maybe metrics may require some work, but otherwise things will be stable. This has been a adoption blocker because people didn't want their data to be broken or their entire pipeline, or they didn't want to invest too much building tools around this type of data because they didn't know if the data was going to be breaking or not. So it's a huge milestone for the project. And the next thing that we're going to do it with logs. It's in the early stage. Maybe the data format is not going to change that much, but we're going to formalize a few other things, make sure that the work is going well in the client libraries, and we want to build some sort of parsers for well-known formats and so on. So there's a lot of conversation going on for logs at this point in terms of what are the next steps are. But yeah, we can give a couple of links. Please take a look. Documentation might be lacking a bit because project was in the was trying to figure out the stable version. So I think a lot of work will be done from this point on in terms of contributing to docs. There will be better examples, more end-to-end examples, and so on. So if you see anything you don't have to do code contributions, even just reporting those type of cases would be a good contribution.
And Jaana, yeah, we make sure that we collect some links and put them on the podcast summary as well. We'll do this.
Let me give you a couple of links. We can do it now or later.
Perfect. Yeah, GitHub, OpenTelemetry obviously is a great starting
obviously.
point.
Yeah, these are two obvious. But spec is the important repo. The data model is in the proto repo, which is also an important one. The client libraries, each of them are there. There's so much going on, so it's kind of hard to into. I mean, I can give you all the links, but
that's fine. I think an entry point is good for people.
I think these three, spec, proto, collector, and maybe you can give a couple of links to libraries. For some of the languages at least, these are really good entry points. And the SIG meetings actually are super useful if they want to contribute, and they are all here. You probably know about this repo as well. There's a calendar section where you can see all the meetings. And yeah, there's KubeCon coming up, and there's another conference, Oli Fest, where there will be a day focused on OpenTelemetry. Maybe we can also mention that the second day will be OpenTelemetry specific. So
thanks for that. So folks that are listening, we'll add all these links to the to the podcast summary, so you can click on it.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Brian, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about, from what I understand, X-rays using OpenTelemetry, right? Or one of the pieces. Now, that's obviously not going to have any auto instrumentation in it yet. But Andy, I believe we have, what is it, a propagator or a collector for X-ray as well, right? So
yeah, exporter.
Exporter, yeah.
Yep.
So if anyone's running anything on that and they wanted to play around with OpenTelemetry, if they own Dynatrace and want to have us to analyze all the data, you can get started already with those two. I think so, right? It seems like it's I've seen a blog or two of ours. I think that's already. I just haven't had a chance to play with it because, well, I'm just busy as everything. But it looks really interesting. I'm really excited to see what comes out of this. Although I know earlier I mentioned my fears of what happens when the cloud providers try to take over. But I think they're on this tracing level, the auto instrumentation side of things. I think it's going to be really awesome as things go along. Because as Andy said, it will make our side of the house a little bit easier. Right. I mean, let's say we even got to a world where all the cloud providers did all the instrumentation, and we didn't have anybody on-prem anymore. Right. And I'm speaking fantasy world, right? But that would give the vendors and all of us the ability to solely concentrate on analyzing and alerting and AI for the data and all that. So there's really I don't really see a net loss in anything for these things. As we see when automation and pipelines come in, it's all about moving forward and moving with the thing. So just another example of the ever-evolving technology space that we live in, which is just crazy. As time goes on, it just gets crazier and crazier, I tell you.
Yeah.
I sound like an old man, but it's just insane.
I feel like, I'm tired of these things, right? Like, in the last 5 years, I was like, I just want to retire. It's like the same thing again and again, right? Like you feel like you're not sure if it's like any progress or it's just like the same thing repeating again with different people. So,
right. Well, that's the funny thing we see with Kubernetes, right? There was the idea of like, oh, Kubernetes comes out, you just throw everything up there and it runs. So like, well, no, it doesn't. And then you start having your Kubernetes code as the new infrastructure to maintain. And everything just moves. But as we discussed on previous episodes, there are definite benefits that come along with these changes. The workloads shift. The model shift, there's a lot of similarities because it's just a morphing model, but the benefits if you think about Kubernetes and containers and all that, the world of automation that it opened up has just been absolutely incredible, but now you got to write all your automation scripts.
Yeah. And, I was super skeptical about Kubernetes because, hey, we're trying to do this again, it's the complex API surface because it tries to do everything at once. And, most of the people just don't care about all these use cases. This is more like an API for cloud providers. But, it kind of enabled this big ecosystem and this entire, new area of, automation. And, it's a cluster-wide automation that just didn't exist before. So, it just kind of, changed a lot of things. There's a lot of complexity in Kubernetes, but it also, that complexity enables some of these things that was not possible before, right?
Yeah. It enabled Captain.
There you go.
That's our open source project that brings automation.
And Andy always has to mention it. It's like it wouldn't be an episode if Andy doesn't mention it. I used to have when we first started with Captain, I didn't get to do it because I was recording in the morning, but it was the idea of a drinking game every time Andy mentions Captain. Yeah, so I'll just drink some of my water here.
All right, I think it's time to wrap it up. Jaana, thank you so much for being on the show. I hope to have you back.
Thank you for waiting for a long time. So
that was worth it. Absolutely worth it.
I'm happy to wait for one more year, and then we have you back for what happened in the last year. Right? Where are we with OpenTelemetry? I think that would be a good checkpoint.
Unless I start working on databases again, or we can talk about databases.
Oh, that'd be great.
About databases too. Yeah.
We don't have many shows on database, so
yeah.
That would be great.
If you're up for another show, we can record it in the next couple of weeks and say, let's refresh your memory on database performance.
No, let's do it if I pivot back to databases.
Okay.
So, I sound legit enough. Like I need to work on the, area. I have too many opinions on, on that field, but I think it's just let's do it when I'm back on databases.
Sounds good.
It's good to be an opinionated platform. But I'll challenge any of our listeners. If our listeners are very knowledgeable in, or I shouldn't even say very knowledgeable because no one ever thinks they're knowledgeable enough. If you have knowledge on database performance, let us know. Maybe we can have you on and discuss it because I think it's a topic that doesn't get enough attention. Mm-hmm. Any final thoughts, Jaana?
I mean, it was great to be here, but like we just really pointed out a lot of like the pain points. As much as you, I'm also a pessimist, but trying to be an optimist at the same time because I've seen some of these projects actually like shift things in the long term. So I hope that it turns out to be a good outcome.
Yeah,
critical optimist is a better word than pessimist.
I always used to say I was a pessimistic optimist. I hope for the best, but expect the worst. This way, I'm never disappointed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for being on the show. I'd like to thank our listeners for listening. If anybody has any questions or comments, please reach out to us at pure_DT. Jaana, do you do any social media that you wanted to share? Or
yeah, I have a Twitter account, or I don't know. I'm trying to. If people want to like reach out, they can use this.
All right, we'll have that in the show notes for anyone who wants to follow that. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back soon. And bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.